Welcome to the Celebration of You. I'm your host, Holly Dowling. I'm thrilled to share with you incredible people from all over the world who are living and leading extraordinary lives. From overcoming immense adversity to discovering the secret sauce to leading with courage and grace. Their stories are going to bring you hope and inspiration. Now let the stories begin. What a great day, and I'm so excited to introduce you all to this amazing new friend of mine who was introduced to me by a common friend of ours, Daniel Horgan. Welcome, Daniel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Holly. I'm excited to be with you.
Oh, I'm thrilled. And you're sitting in the beautiful, little chilly New York today, right?
It is. The rain has passed, though, and the sky has cleared up, so we're in good shape.
All right. Well, you know what I love about that is I have to say it's been quite a bit rainy. I've been on the road, but when I'm home back in Arizona, I'm like, where I need to see my blue skies and palm trees. So today's a good day.
Nice. I'm visualizing that.
I know. We'll just visualize that. We're across the United States from each other. Well, I thank you. Thanks for being here because our listeners are in for a real treat because Daniel is... When I got fortunately blessed to be introduced to him and then learn more about you and read so much about you, you're nationally recognized, globally recognized, but you're doing something you love. So tell us what you're doing now, because this all came, you'll soon hear more about this, but it all came from a vision and a passion at a young age. But tell us about what you're doing now and what you're excited about.
Sure. So I'm actually celebrating this month 2 years of running my own business, which is specifically focused on helping the individuals and organizations addressing social issues around the country and in some cases around the world. My work really falls into two different categories. On one hand, I do a lot of consulting work, helping organizations and individuals with strategic planning, program design, and group coaching. And then on the other hand, I do a lot within the professional development and the training space, helping individuals and organizations really accelerate their ability to drive impact in communities by helping them build their skills or enhance the skills needed to hit their strategic planning goals.
And what I love is the niche. You're in a niche, and this is why I want to celebrate you, because I think there's so many people that don't realize the magnitude of what can be done, or maybe their own personal interest in doing something. But tell us about the niche that's really created the sector that you're doing so much work globally in.
Yeah, so throughout my career, working in nonprofit organizations as well as worked in corporate social responsibility for a while, I've always been passionate about and have seen a need for more professional development, particularly for frontline staff, all the way up to new managers within organizations and communities. And so when I sort of worked on launching my business, the idea was really to not only provide that type of service, but to do something that differentiated my work from others, which is to really make sure that training and that coaching that I offer is accessible and it's affordable. There's an interesting statistic right now that 10% of the workforce goes to work every day in the nonprofit sector. That represents 10.7 million people going to work in nonprofit organizations that are striving to achieve their mission and in many ways addressing social and global issues. And I want to make sure that the professional development that the individuals working in those organizations, that they have access to that, whether it's through webinars and podcasts or opportunities to take classes or to provide that one-on-one or group coaching that they need to really discover their strengths and put their strengths to work in the organization, but ultimately to really live their passion in a way that they can afford and pay for their bills, but at the same time make a difference in the world.
Oh, and you know what? That statistic is startling. Like, you don't realize that 10% of our workforce is in the nonprofit, and that equates to over 10 million people. I mean, I think that we don't quite realize that. And this is what I love about the story you're about to hear, everybody. And I would highly recommend, I know a lot of people listen to these podcasts when they're running. It's like their treat for the week. I hear from all kinds of listeners, Dan, that this is like, or they're driving or they're having their lunch, but you're going to hear some amazing statistics and some really amazing things that might be what's yearning in the heart that's been pulling on, the strings that are pulling on your heart. And I think that that's this story that you're about to hear, and hear how somebody, we're going to go there because this all started at a young age. But I think all of us as human beings have a desire to give back and do things. And we always feel maybe we're handcuffed, or how could I ever do that? Or that old line, Dan, how could I do what I love and still pay the rent?
Exactly. Exactly.
So let's get ready, because we'll head down that path now, and we'll begin to hear a story from Dan's past.
Sure. I remember it because it was the first week I was home by myself, and it was kind of like, well, that's not very fun. So now I wanted to do what they were doing. And so I convinced my older brother, Tom, to talk to the camp director and open up an opportunity for me to come and volunteer at the camp. And so at the age of 11, I ended up volunteering with the 6-year-olds there and just, fell in love with it. Throughout that experience that summer, I, again, modeled everything that my brothers were doing in terms of how they were counseling the students or how they were leading activities. I was trying to, replicate everything they were doing. And it wasn't till the second summer that I was volunteering there that I got matched with a young boy who had Down syndrome. And this young boy really, I think, shifted my perspective because I was no longer looking at everything that my brothers were doing, but I was so focused on making sure that the camp experience and this young boy's interaction with all the other kids at the camp was the best that it could be every day. And it was that spirit of service. It was I think the first time I obviously didn't know the word or didn't understand at the time, but for me, it was about discovering empathy and sort of putting myself in the shoes of this young boy and thinking about what the world looks like from his point of view. And making it as just, the best experience, the most fun. And he, in turn, taught me so much. He came to camp every day without any fear of jumping in on any of the activities. He came to camp with this huge smile. He hugged everybody and just wanted to be there like everybody else. And so that kickstarted I think my career, and I don't really call it a career. It's like my passion, it's my purpose to really serve others and to ultimately help others in the same way that I helped that young boy discover what they have inside, how unique and special it can be, and how they can bring that to life both, at work, at home, with their friends, wherever they are, how they can sort of live that true meaning, that true purpose.
And truly, that defines the beginning of what ended up becoming your lifelong passion. And, when you think about that you've become, you're nationally recognized, globally recognized for the work you're doing in this nonprofit space. And to think that you took a lot of years of experience. You've been in the corporate world yourself, and then you started your own company, right? You said 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And when you think about how, what I want people to hear from this is that many times those visions and passions are put on our heart at some point when we're much younger. And yet, what do we continue to do to, I say, feed it, water it, and nurture it so that you can be the greatest, highest calling of yourself in this world, and you're doing it. And you found a really amazing way to do this. So I just love that story. And I think it just is a great segue into, Dan, so take us from when that happened. I love how now correct me if I'm wrong, but when you when you headed to college,
yep,
you ended up you were the only one in the country doing what you did, to start this voice in America. Tell us about that, because that was another big part of this journey for you.
Sure. So back in 1998, retired General Colin Powell at the time had launched a national movement. It really wasn't referred to as an organization. It was much more of a movement called America's Promise. And America's Promise was really focused. Their mission was to make sure that young people across the country had access to 5 fundamental promises, which included everything from a caring adult or a mentor to a safe place to a really great education, making sure they had marketable skills. And the 5th promise was service opportunities, an opportunity to give back to their community, as well as a healthy start. And those 5 promises for me, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that really made sure that I had access to those things. And I never even thought about, what it would be like without having them. And so when I was a freshman in college, I really, fell in love with the mission of what America's Promise was all about. I saw a need on the college campus. I went to Robert Morris University in Pittsburgh. And there wasn't really a formalized volunteer initiative on campus at the time. And so I saw a lot of students that I was in classes with, as well as faculty that were really interested in engaging in community, but didn't necessarily know where to go or how to get started. And I also saw a lot of need in the different school districts and different neighborhoods around the greater Pittsburgh area. And so, I started out and saying, I'm going to bring America's Promise, create a community of promise, which is what they were called, here to Pittsburgh, and started mobilizing people on campus and going out and doing lots of meetings with community organizations. And as we started to form, obviously we needed some resources to run the programs that we were running. And as an 18-year-old, you can imagine, you get a whole lot of no's and very, very few yeses. And so, I think that was the point too, where whether I was naive or just young at the time and said to myself, that motivated me. I think for a lot of people that might be listening to this, when they get told no a lot, they feel discouraged and they sometimes back away from something that they're maybe passionate about or something they feel like may be a purpose, but they're not getting that break, And I think for me, it just motivated me more. That's the name of my book, Tell Me I Can and I Will, which is all about going out there and finding alternative ways of making it happen. And what I learned later on, probably 6 to 12 months into it, was we were the only community of promise in the country that was completely youth-led. So my quote-unquote staff were college students and high school students that we called Promise Fellows. They received either scholarships or education stipends to help us run the programs that we were running in the community for kids.
Which is just amazing, right? The only one in the country that was youth led. And I think that, and I'm just sitting here smiling because I think when I realized, when you told me about, when I saw the title of your book, Tell Me I Can't and I Will, I don't know if you know this, but that's my mantra and signature speaking around the world is tell me no, watch me go. And it's a story I share with youth, and it's the book title of my book that's in the works, but it's all about I truly believe as a young person, right? The more no's I heard, the more it fueled me.
Love it.
Isn't that funny? Great. I mean, look at us. It's like this happens every time we talk, Daniel. I'm like, oh my goodness. It's like,
I love it.
I love it. I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. So this takes us though, what I love, tell us about the exposure you got while you were doing that. You then got invited to sit, in many boardrooms, with CEOs, and you were like the young person and you had some profound experiences, and so did they. Right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Tell us about that. Yeah.
So, obviously I was working with America's Promise's national staff, and as they started to see what we were doing in Pittsburgh, particularly in mobilizing youth as the leadership of the movement, I got invited to join the National Board of America's Promise as one of 2 youth representatives. And, as you can imagine, I was 18 at the time. And I went to my first board meeting in Washington, D.C. And, you're sitting at a table with retired General Colin Powell, his wife. You're sitting there with CEOs of major Fortune 100 companies. You have celebrities in the room that are a part of the board or the advisory team. And, that's a very intimidating, he's an 18-year-old. That's a very intimidating group of people. And, just being, sitting there in the first board meeting and frankly the several after, trying to figure out, number one, why am I here specifically? What can I offer this group that no one else in this room can? And it took me a little while to figure that out. I was, really nervous at the time, and somebody who has been a mentor for me, who was on staff, really pulled me aside afterwards. And former Senator Harris Wofford, who's has a legacy in the service field, also pulled me aside, and we ended up going to a coffee shop after one of the board meetings. And I'll never forget this. On the back of napkins and those paper placemats that you can see at like a coffee shop or diner, we started mapping out this whole strategy of how we could mobilize more young people to organize in their communities. And I realized at that point, I think that the value I brought to that board was the youth perspective and this idea that if you're going to be mobilizing communities across the country for young people absolutely have to be at the table and a core part of the decision making, the brainstorming. We can't do things at people. We have to do things with people. And that was something that was sort of very, very central. And I frankly did not even realize that was like a core part of my mobilizing strategy in Pittsburgh. It was always about going to young people. I held listening sessions in classrooms and schools all across the Pittsburgh area. We facilitated community listening sessions at night with parents and community organizations because I really wanted to understand what people wanted, what they needed, and then how we could put those resources in play. And I learned that through the board as well. Like that was my role, is to bring that youth voice. We ended up launching what was called the Youth Partnership Team, which was 24 young people in their early 20s and younger all across the country that were doing similar types of community organizing or had a passion for service. And we infused that youth voice nationally, but also encouraged and engaged many, many more youth across the country.
Oh, and when I just picture, like I had a visual of you sitting there with the senator and with on the back of the napkin, right? And just starting to strategize. But I think that's just such a great lesson, because look at what you had the opportunity to be exposed to at a young age because of your vision and your passion, but also the gift you gave them, right? You were the voice. of the youth at that time and expressing things and helping them understand. And I think that's what you've continued. When I think about who I've gotten to know you to be, you're carrying the torch, Dan, of lighting the pathway for people, individuals, organizations. This is what you do now. And especially in the nonprofit world and all of the work you're doing and continuing to light the path for people and bringing hope and understanding and knowing that there's resources, there's ways to do this. I just love your story. And I have to say to everybody, so doing a little research with Dan, you've had some amazing opportunities. You've been written up in Forbes. You're very nationally recognized. But I was reading an article. This is going to take us kind of fast forward to some things more recently.
Sure.
And I was reading an article about, what you've done with youth mentoring and, with a lot of the global clients that I feel very honored to work with, I see and hear a lot about the work that they're trying to do and that they are doing. But what blew my mind was the article I read was all about the work you've been doing with Deloitte's Gloman Hume, with their work around mentoring. And I'm like, whoa. So tell us about that work you're doing and the amazing impact it's having. That was cool.
Yeah. I mean, as you can imagine, I've had many, many mentors in my life that I've been fortunate enough to learn from and to grow from. And so mentoring has always been a core passion and area of interest. And I always look for ways, no matter what role that I've been in. I served on the board, the local mentoring partnership in Pittsburgh. When I moved to DC and worked at Capital One, I supported a number of mentoring initiatives and programs in the DC area. And then today, I continue to work. It's now, I was trying to count the other day. It's well over 12 years that I've been supporting Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, which is based out of Boston. And through Mentor, I have the opportunity to work with companies. My main role is to help companies who are interested in either launching or expanding their youth mentoring initiatives. And so the opportunity with Deloitte came about a year and a half ago to really, take a step back from all of the mentoring initiatives that they've been engaged in. As you can imagine, as a professional services firm, mentoring is a core part of their values in terms of their employee relations. So they saw it as a natural connection to their corporate social responsibility programming as well. And so I helped them to look at several markets, understand the current mentoring initiatives. Frankly, a lot of Deloitte employees were doing outside of their day job. They were mobilizing their peer network at the company to go out and mentor a group of students at a local school or local after school program. And so we sort of collected all that information and helped them to formulate what's called now Right Step Mentor, which is a national umbrella for all of Deloitte's mentoring activities. I'm super proud to have also launched a virtual mentoring program with them as well. That to date has over 700 Deloitte employees that have registered over the last few months.
Wow.
And that have been trained to serve as mentors in partnership with an organization called Strive for College. And that's helping kids prepare for and engage in successfully in college.
And I just think that's amazing because I absolutely love Deloitte. They're one of my they're just an amazing client, and to watch the work. And these people are truly giving of themselves, right? This is time above and beyond what their normal, professional hat is. And when I was reading that and learning that, and then you shared some statistics and some nuggets with me. So talk to us about one of the things that you're helping as you empower these managers and people to help mentor these youth. There was some I thought the vernacular, some of the nuggets you shared with me earlier. What were some of those nuggets that you're finding? To me, it was so simple and yet it's having a profound impact.
Yeah. I think so. One interesting and powerful statistic is the fact that, and this is why I've been so passionate about working with Mentor, is that nationally, 1 in 3 kids are growing up in America today without access to a caring adult in their life. So 1/3 of our kids essentially don't have somebody that they can turn to either at home or in their community to ask for advice, to open up and express maybe some of the challenges or questions that they're going through and trying to figure out where they go through school and beyond. And so, the work that I do a lot with companies is not only get them to understand the importance of mentoring and how it ties into a variety of both business and community outcomes, but also understanding the power that it can have both on the mentor and the mentee. And so a lot of the training we do focuses on growth mindset, for example. And so if you think about it, young people will often in a mentoring relationship say something like, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this, or I can't do X, whether it's at school or in their community or maybe a hobby that they're trying to perfect in terms of a sports team or something. And what we train mentors to do is to listen really closely to the language that young people are using. And I always call it the power of yet. And so this idea of when you hear a kid say, I'm never going to be able to do this, or I can't do this. All you have to do as a mentor is just throw out the word yet. And it changes, it shifts. You can see when you're physically sitting with a young person, and even if you're virtually mentoring as well, you can see it in the conversation. There's a shift in the mindset that starts to happen where all of a sudden the kid discovers that somebody actually believes that it's possible for me to do what I just said is impossible. And so that confidence that somebody else has in them shifts their perspective and starts to say, well, what if it would be possible? And that's really where the power of mentoring comes in, is to take that conversation to the next level and thinking about how do we take the steps? How do we break that big task or big path ahead that you feel like is maybe overwhelming down into smaller chunks, smaller steps that we can take together step by step to get you to the point where you can overcome something you said you couldn't do.
I just love the power of yet. And I'm loving that one word. And there's something too about what you help people understand and empower them is that it's even as much as what they're not saying.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And we do a lot of training around active listening, obviously, but I always say, and even when I've done leadership training with a lot of different nonprofit organizations, is to challenge managers to think about, you have to also listen to what's not being said. And as managers and as mentors, one of our core responsibilities is to ask great questions, right? Is to talk less, but ask the great questions that start to surface below the surface for young people, especially, and for young professionals in nonprofit organizations, what it is that they feel like is holding them back, or what it is that they absolutely love that brings them to life. And as a manager, as a mentor, how do you help them get more of that, right? Or how do you help them break down that big challenge that they're facing into smaller pieces so that they can step by step work their way through it?
I just think that those two things to me, I mean, again, it's not rocket science, but this is the heavy lifting that you help people realize. And through that mentoring, right? It's not just going to impact that young person. I think, and I know you and I talked about this, but this is just human beings in general. There's even grown adults like us that could use that added lift and inspiration and education around simple things like that. And I have to say this. Have you done a TED Talk on Power of Yet?
I have not.
You need to. We need to get that on the docket for you, my friend. Oh,
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. I'm like, okay, I have it written down next to I have your picture, and I'm like, Power of Yet, that's next for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a success story you shared with me, or is it somebody that, without sharing names, but I'm thinking about people right now that are listening that are individually, right, have that yearning inside that they want to do something in giving back. But like, that quote that you mentioned that, how do I go do what I love and still pay the rent? But you've helped somebody, and more than just somebody's, to be able to reflect and think about what they can do in their current situation to even bring that to their own corporation without having to leave.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the coaching and the training that I do is focused on, and this is where you and I have a similar passion around helping people both identify and leverage their strengths. And so a big part of what I see, particularly with younger professionals in the nonprofit sector, is they reach a point where maybe their peer group, their group of friends, their family members are off in companies, and maybe they're rising in the ranks much faster. They're getting a lot more in terms of compensation. And so young professionals start to say like, oh, maybe I'm feeling a little stagnant in this role. I don't really see growth opportunities, and therefore I'm going to want to move on to the next opportunity. And, and that could absolutely be the right step for some people. But I always challenge the people that I'm working with to take a step back. And this particular person, I challenge them to say, okay, what do you do in your current role that makes you come to life, right? And so I always have these very tangible tools that I share with people I'm working with, because again, for me, it's about combining the theory with the actual practice. You have to put the hard work in to get to where you want to go. And so I had her actually keep a journal for a week or two that specifically every time that she leaned into a particular activity where she saw physically herself like getting more excited, feeling more engaged, feeling more energized by the specific task that she was doing, she would just have a Post-it note next to her laptop where she would keep a little journal or keep track of those particular activities. And then we sat back and we looked at all of those activities together, and we saw the common trend of where it was that she was getting the most energy. So as, in working with her, I helped her to see, well, you could go somewhere else and do more of that, or you could look for opportunities within your current organization, which happened to be a small nonprofit, to bring that more to life. And so in really transparent conversations with her manager, I coached her on how to open up to her and say, here's where I am. Here's where I want to go. What opportunities can we co-create together here in this organization that's going to add meaning? It's going to help us accelerate our impact as an organization, but it's also going to align with my professional goals and the skills that I want to be able to build. And within about 2 months, she ended up getting a promotion at work. Her manager thanked her for being so transparent and open as opposed to just leaving. And just lastly, I talk very passionate, obviously, about this work.
Yes, I know. I love it too. I'm just sitting here smiling. Yes, I love it.
But one interesting statistic is, the average retention rate for a lot of frontline program staff in nonprofit organizations is anywhere from a year to 2.5, 3 years. And so just the pure cost of that turnover within the nonprofit sector and the learning curve that happens when you're bringing new people in on a constant basis. When I look at the macro picture, it really impacts our ability to address the social issues that we're trying to solve, right? And so if we can work with young people, especially in organizations, and frankly, anybody, it doesn't matter what age you are, to bring your strengths to life more, where you get more energized in the work that you're doing, you're going to be retained in those roles. And that energy and excitement you bring to work is going to make such a bigger difference in terms of that mission, addressing that social issue. And everybody wins. Communities win, you win, the organization wins. And to me, it's just a no-brainer. And that's why I've completely dedicated the work that I'm doing to that space.
And it doesn't matter. And I always say this, it doesn't matter what culture, where you live, what your education is. It doesn't matter how old you are. We're all human beings. And we were all given these gifts and strengths and talents. And it's what are we doing? And when you get to help people kind of fall back in love with that, as I like to say, then you fall back in love with joy at what you're doing. And that energy, it's like the ripple effect, right? I mean, it just goes everywhere. Well, okay. So a couple of things before we wrap this up. I have to ask you, if somebody's listening right now, more just for their own sake, if they're an individual and or they're at an organization and they want to learn more about mentoring, whether they want to personally start giving back and doing something in their own personal life, in a mentoring capacity, and or if they want to help their company do kind of what Deloitte has done, what advice do you give them? How do they begin this? Where do they go next?
Sure. So I would definitely direct them to Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. Their website's mentoring.org. And mentoring.org also offers what's called the Mentoring Connector. So if you're an individual or even if you're a company that's looking or an organization looking to get engaged in mentoring, the Mentoring Connector is the only national database of registered and approved mentoring organizations across the country that are reaching a certain standard of quality in terms of their mentoring initiatives. We have what's called the elements of effective practice. So it's making sure that, everybody's safe, obviously, in the mentoring experience, but it's also making sure that there's operational, elements in place to ensure success for everybody. And so Mentoring Connector is a great resource for people. Type in their zip code. They can type in the type of mentoring that they're looking for, whether it's, in person or virtual, and they can go through a series of, results that show them in their own community where they can get connected.
Oh, I love that. I mean, that is just the beginning. Like that's one place you can start right now. And I love that you actually made sure that we know that it's approved and it's a good place, right?
Absolutely.
Love that. So this is just top of mind. You had no idea I was going to ask you this.
Sure.
When, if you were to give your 25-year-old self advice based on who you are today and what you know, what would that advice be to your 25-year-old self, Dan?
That's a great question. What I find interesting about that question is, I feel like the older that I get, I wish in some cases I had some of the perspectives that I had when I was younger. I think when I was starting America's Promise, I just went for it, right? And just didn't let anything stand in my way or anybody tell me that I couldn't do it. And I think the older you get, sometimes it's harder to take that step. And so looking back, I would say probably two things. One is don't let perfection stand in the way of progress. I tell people that all the time. It's one of my biggest challenges personally. I want everything to be perfect. And so oftentimes we'll hold off on putting anything out there into the world, whether it's a blog post or coaching advice or a new training that I'm offering, but just take the first step, take that leap instead of worrying about what the end game is going to look like and how polished it's going to be. Just start moving and you'll gain energy along the way, and you'll gain insight that will help accelerate your work. I think the other thing I would just offer is always look for ways to differentiate yourself. I think that's, in hindsight, what happened with the work that I did early on in my career. Is I saw a lot of people saying that they couldn't do stuff and that things weren't possible. Change was never going to come to a particular neighborhood. And so I always say, be the optimist in what can feel like sometimes a sea of pessimism. And when you're that optimist, your smile, your energy, your positivity is contagious, and it will help, it'll help spur other people to realize that they too can align with their strengths and follow their passion.
Oh, I love it. Both of those huge pieces of wisdom. And, as I'm listening to you and I was thinking about, there's some people within my elite extraordinaire community. I have an amazing community of people that were handpicked and invited. And that's how I met you, because we have an amazing extraordinaire, now common friend, Michelle, who is the one that introduced me to you. But I was just thinking about, you're so aligned. There's some people within my community that around the world that I think would love to hear this. So I'm going to make sure they get to hear the interview, and then I'll probably be making an introduction to you to them, because there's some powerful people that are making huge differences in this world and choosing to do what you're doing, choosing to say, how can I make a bigger difference in the world, and willing to step out in faith and out of fear to do that.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, I love that, Dan. Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. You're so empowering, so inspiring. And if people would like to learn more and just connect with you, how would you like them to do that?
Sure. So they can connect through my website, which is just www.d as in Dan, G as in George, Horgan, Horgan as in Nancy.com. They could also reach me on Twitter at Horgan Daniel, Horgan Daniel. And they could also send me an email directly to my personal email, which would be daniel@dghorgangroup.com.
Love it. Perfect. And we'll make sure we have that information in our blog that we send out. And as I promised you, good chance I'm going to be in New York at the United Nations here in a couple weeks. So as soon as I know for sure, I will be connecting with you. So maybe we could do a Facebook Live and let everybody get to see you in person. How would that be?
That would be amazing. I would love that for sure.
That would be fantastic. Well, thank you. Oh, Dan, this has been great. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me for another awesome celebration of you. If you were inspired by this story, please share it with your family and friends and hashtag Your Story Matters. I'd love to hear from you, so please leave a comment on iTunes. And absolutely, please come to my website, hollydowling.com. Leave a comment there too, and while you're there, pick up your free gift. Most importantly though, just remember that your life is a gift from God. What you do with it is your gift back.